My name's Matthew, and this is Audio Indies, the show for podcasters who put the listening experience first. On this episode, I'm joined by Lindsay Friel, a writer, storyteller, and audio drama creator. She's someone whose work I've followed and admired for well over a decade, and I was excited that she agreed to come on and share her wisdom and experience with us. And I started off by asking Lindsay about her earliest childhood memories of listening to spoken word audio.
We had gone down to the shore with my parents in the summer and riding home in the car, and my dad was flipping around the stations as we were driving through the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, which is a very desolate place, especially it certainly was in the 70s, and driving very, very slowly in heavy traffic at sunset. And then my dad somehow found that a radio drama version of Star Wars was playing on the radio. And we were listening to this with rapt attention because Star Wars was huge at the time. The movie had just come out that year or the year before or something. And we were really surprised that it was on the radio. So that was a very good way to spend a slow, stuck in traffic drive home during sunset. And it was just this magical experience of 1 minute you're in the car with your parents and it's so slow and so annoying. And then all of a sudden you're taken to a galaxy far, far away. And then another experience that I had that really always sticks with me was when I was a kid. Our school library was this tiny little house almost with a fireplace, which always makes me feel like, yeah, there's something kids don't get anymore. The librarians would just bank up the fireplace and let it go on days when it was really cold. So you could go in there and sit by a fireplace and read a book or whatever. And we had some sort of tape player that had these huge proprietary cassettes that you could load in, and then sets of headphones, and we would cluster around that and listen to Edgar Allan Poe on rainy days. And this wasn't like a formal thing, like the teacher saying to us, go in the library and listen to Edgar Allan Poe. It was as if my friends and I discovered this all on our own. We just went in there and we would listen to The Fall of the House of Usher on rainy days, which was wonderful.
How did these experiences factor into you getting into producing your own spoken word content, your own audio fiction? And, if we fast forward to adulthood?
It felt like freedom for me because when I was about that age or a little bit older, probably about 10, my parents got me a tape cassette or a cassette recorder, and my friends and I would make up our own stories and record them and make up our own sound effects. And we loved doing that. And then fast forward to the 21st century, my husband loves audio engineering and he loves sound design and music. And he and I started, when the podcast boom started around, I think I heard We're Alive. And I thought, no disrespect to Casey Whalen, but I thought, I can do that. And we started just seeing what we could write and record and produce by ourselves. And then I wrote a script that a friend of mine gave me a prompt for that eventually became Yarnsaksa Rising, which is spelled with a J, not a Y. And it's probably one of the worst titles ever for English-speaking podcasters because people say to me all the time, I tried to find your podcast, but all I could find was knitting shows. And I made that with a theater director in Minneapolis named Karen Bratley. And she had all of these resources from doing theater in Minneapolis and Minnesota. And I had some theater resources in Philadelphia. And people in Philadelphia were not into it unless they were really deep into the comic book, Norse mythology, fantasy novel scene. And people in Minnesota, on the other hand, loved it because they have, I always say to people, they have Scandinavians like people in Philadelphia have Italians and Irish people. So they really were interested in it. And so that was, that was sort of the I guess that's the early branch of how I went from Star Wars in the car and Edgar Allan Poe in the library to Norse mythology on the internet.
I could totally relate to you saying about discovering We're Alive, and at that time I had very early experience of Adobe Audition and just thinking I'll do that too. So how did that kind of go when you started to put these shows together?
Well, there's sort of this mental leap that you take when you first start listening to audio drama, that some of them make you think I can do that, and some of them make you think I don't know how they did that, but I'm gonna find out. Like, how did they do that? It seems like a magic trick, especially when you hear something like, I can't remember what show it was, but there was one show I was listening to where the characters were having a conversation while hanging laundry out on a line in a backyard. And then you hear what sounds like them walking inside the house, and the whole tone changes, the reverb changes, everything. And you can clearly hear, oh, they're inside now. And I'm thinking, how did that smooth progression happen? I want to learn how they did that. So the first thing, my husband, when he and I were first dating, we were talking about different theater things, and he told me that when he was in college, for a class, he and his class made a radio drama version of Waiting for Godot, which to me sounds insane because famously, Waiting for Godot is the play where, quote unquote, nothing happens. But atmospherically, that's really not true because it depends on where they are. What if you have Waiting for Godot taking place in a train station? Or what if you had it taking place in the rain? There are atmospheric elements to consider that give you this rich sounds, or the opportunity for a rich soundscape. And we just came up with this idea of let's make something and see if it works. So we made what was sort of supposed to sound like a community bulletin board for the neighborhood that we lived in at the time. It was called Radio Free Tacony. And we only released it we put it on SoundCloud, and we only showed it to people who we thought were worth sharing with. Like, I think we probably posted it on Facebook, but mostly we just sort of shared it with people whose opinion we cared about, and asked them really specific questions about what we did. Like, did you notice this? Or what was distracting, or what was confusing? What did you notice the most? So that way we could learn from their feedback. And like that one, for example, it had one that was a comedy sketch that sounded like two hipsters in a restaurant, and you can hear or not in a restaurant, but in a bar, you can hear it just sounds like you're in a pub for the night. So there's people talking and there's music in the background, and we had all of those elements that we could play with. Mm-hmm. And then we just started sort of moving up from there.
Tell me about a recording day for you, like an example of a recording day, and you could maybe get into like something that you've done to record an audio drama or a fiction podcast versus, preparing to have a conversation like this. I know you run, non-fiction shows yourself and record conversations. So starting with that, because it's in the main more straightforward. Like, what does it look like for you just getting set up to record?
So there's very different ways to do it. If I'm doing audio drama, or if I'm doing, and that's changed over the years so much too, because I think we were recording Jörn Saxa Rising in 2014 2014 or so. And the whole podcast recording scene and technology has changed so much. Typically now, what we have is a multi-mic setup in our basement, or I really should call it the lounge because that's what my husband calls it. We have a finished basement in our house, and there's one door going outside, but we have blackout curtains over that, which muffle most of the sound from outside. But as you well know, inevitably, anytime you turn on and anytime you hit record, there's always going to be somebody running a lawnmower. So we have a multi-mic setup with a Zoom. I can't remember what it is. But it's a multi-track. It's a multi-track mixer, and we record into an SD card. So we can record down there. When we did Yarn Socks Rising, we did it in a hotel room, which was we recorded with a multi-mic setup with people standing up with microphones on stands, the same way you would record in any studio, and all of it was going into a mixing board and then into my laptop. And when we did that, the only thing that made it any different from a regular studio was that it had a bed in the middle of the room, which probably would have worked for somebody like Brian Wilson. But everything in the room is soft, and hotel rooms are meant to keep their sound in the room. And so we didn't have much in the way of leaking out and bothering other people, but we also didn't have any sound bleed from outside.
Yeah.
There was one point where somebody turned on a TV on the wall that was directly behind Mary. It was a TV in the room next to us, on the wall directly behind Mary Lynn, the woman who played Yarn Soxa, and Vince managed to reduce the noise there from that, but you really can only hear it if you were really, really paying attention.
Yeah,
so that's
nothing a little bit of room tone can't fix in the end, isn't it?
Exactly. Then we also covered it up with a lot of wind, and fortunately it was a scene where she was outdoors, so there was a lot of things like wind elements that we could, and storm elements that we could add to at least distract from the television if you couldn't cover it up completely. For a nonfiction podcast, I record in my office, and I've got big purple blackout curtains that I put over the window to reduce reverb from the glass. This room does have a 9-foot ceiling, but it's got a carpet. I keep it pretty soft in here. It's not that bad. I don't have that much reverb. Not reverb that's uncontrollable, at any rate. And then I work with a lot of remote recording these days, whether it's audio drama or nonfiction.
Yeah, so that's when you're basically sending the scripts out to your cast and they're recording their lines independently. Do you, I'm using the term trust here, not in a negative way, but like I've always kind of trusted the cast because it's a small group of people that I know.
Sure.
I know that they know each other's voice, and I don't feel the need to get them together on Zoom or whatever and record locally. How do you kind of approach that?
My preference is, in a perfect world, I like to have one rehearsal of about 2 hours, maybe 4 hours, that we can read through and work through the script together remotely using something like, Zoom or whatever kind of virtual conferencing software you prefer, and no recording. And then after that, we can record with Zoom running so that people can see each other and hear each other. But then everybody has their own setup, and they record their end and then send it to me or whoever is editing it.
What do you edit with? Do you do a lot of editing in your shows? I mean, let's focus here on the non-fiction stuff. Like,
Sure.
you doing much editing, and if so, what and what with?
I prefer, and this is kind of weird, it's unusual for most podcasters. I prefer Logic Pro, and I don't know how much longer that is going to be a realistic tool for me, because it looks like Apple is shifting to a subscription model like Adobe, as opposed to just letting you buy the software and get updates. But I've been using Logic Pro since the beginning, and I love it. It's a tool for musicians. It's really meant for musicians, but that's what I've learned on, and that's what I use. And it's really not much different than, say, Reaper or Audacity. It looks pretty much the same, but I find that what it means is that I can have a very, very big file and then mix it down and bounce it down into a more manageable, an MP3 that's easier for a hosting service to manage. But I really like I really like Logic Pro, just because it's what I've learned on, and I feel like it gives me the flexibility with audio quality so that I can learn more about how sound works, as opposed to a drag and drop system that doesn't give me that kind of flexibility. Like, here's an example, just in terms of editing. My brother and I were working on a Christmas story together called The Yuletide Cherries, and it was one voice actor, Owen McEwen, and a story that we had written, and he was doing different voices, and we were adding atmospheric elements to it. So we were able to have things like footsteps panning from one side to another. We were able to deal with things getting louder or softer, but most importantly, what's happening in the story is this woman has cherries in winter that she's bringing to the queen as a Christmas gift, or as a Yule gift. And there's a big party in the castle, and she has to negotiate with different guards as she's getting closer and closer to the party, closer and closer to the queen. So when she first gets to the castle, you can hear this medieval feast happening, but it's very muffled. And then as she gets inside the castle, then it gets a little clearer. And then as she's getting closer and closer to the festival, it gets slightly clearer. So we were able to play with EQ, which was teaching my brother the difference between, most people, when you first sort of walk into playing with audio, you think about loud versus quiet. But for him, he's thinking about muffled versus clear now. And you can see it. You can see the EQ very clearly on the screen with all the colors and everything. And he could get a sense of like, oh, yes, this is what we're trying to create. Yeah.
You've done a lot of podcasts in your time, a lot of different shows. Could you tell me about a time that any one of your shows stopped feeling experimental and started feeling, for lack of a better term, like yours?
Yeah. So this one time, my brother and I were we were at a art festival. It was a local street fair with a lot of vendors lined up along two sides of the street. And we brought my phone, and we brought a Zoom i6 microphone that you just plug right into the lightning connector on your phone. And we recorded a bit of my brother talking and describing what it was like to be there. And then we walked around a bit and recorded just ambient field sound. And then as we were walking along, I saw a guy who was there as a vendor. He was an illustrator named Larry West. And I realized at that moment that I had 2 points of in real life, like, oh, I know, like, you might not know me, but I definitely know you. I had seen him at a funeral, which is kind of sad, but also he had juried he had been the curator for a juried art exhibition that my brother had submitted art to and been accepted. So I ran up to him and I said, "Hi, you don't know me. My name's Lindsay. I know that you're Larry West. I love your art. My brother records a podcast." I told him a little bit what it was about. And I said, "Can we just do a very quick interview with you?" Even though we weren't an interview show, we had never done an interview before, and Larry wasn't prepared. We weren't prepared, but it was just like, "Hey, let's give it a try." So we came up to him and we asked him if it was okay, and my brother felt like it was okay. And fortunately, because of the way my brother thinks, he really asked like sort of the questions that everybody gets asked when they're an artist, like, "So how did you refine your craft? How did you first get interested in drawing?" Those kind of basic questions. And it was the kind of thing that Larry was very prepared to answer. And also, he was just such a nice guy. And he and my brother both had a shared interest in horror illustration. So they were able to talk about that a little bit, but it was literally just like 3 questions. And we thanked him and we walked away, and we both looked at each other and we were sort of like, wow, we can try something new in the moment and have it work and have it go off better than we expected.
Yeah.
So it was sort of like, because we were willing to take a risk and experiment, that made it feel more like we owned it and more like we were in charge of the process. I think being willing to screw up or being willing to try something and have it go well or go poorly is when you just say to yourself, "Okay, well, either I'll fix this or I won't continue with it, but I'll try and I'll see how it goes and I'll see what I learned from it."
Have you ever had any listener feedback over the years, like a particular message from a listener that stuck with you?
2 things that stood out for me. My brother and I make a podcast called Life in the Ted Lane, which is it's about what one of the things that it's about is what it's like to be autistic. And right now in the US, there's a lot of sort of banter about, a lot of debate about whether or not autism has a cause, like a specific cause, and whether or not there's a cure. But Ted and I disagree with that. We both feel like autism is just part of who some people are, and it's something that you can accommodate for or you can work around, but it's not like cancer. It's not something that has to be taken away from you and in order to survive. And we got a lovely piece of feedback. Thank goodness for Buzzsprout's fan mail feature. We got a very nice message that said, "Thank you for saying that autism isn't something that needs to be cured." And another piece of feedback that we got was, "We really want to hear more of the brother-sister relationship between the two of you." And I'm always like, yeah, but I think what matters more is the idea that autism is just part of who you are, and in some ways it gives you a unique perspective on the world that's valuable.
When we think about spoken word audio or any form of storytelling, silence is obviously a part of that. Could you tell me any examples of a role that silence has played in your work before?
So when you have a lot of sound and then you suddenly go to silence, it's such it's a disarming contrast, and it really gets the listener's attention. So, like in the case with my brother, he talks like a game show host. He's so excited to record and he's so excited to share ideas that he will talk so fast that I have to get him to slow down. But sometimes I'll ask him a question that really gives him something to think about, and he'll just stop. And I won't edit a pause out unless if it gets to be 6 seconds, then I know he's having trouble answering the question. Like, he really does not know what to say.
Mm-hmm.
But when he goes from being like, hey, it's me, Ted Harris, welcome to Life in the Ted Lane, blah, 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 going a blue streak. And then I ask him a question and he stops. I think it's such a contrast. It's like if you're doing puppetry and you drop a puppet, it sort of creates this space, and it also creates space for the audience to say, ooh, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like that. Mm-hmm. Giving me an example then of either something you heard or something you made yourself. Could you tell me about a moment where sound created tension or atmosphere more effectively than visuals could have?
There's one of the things that happens when you write dialogue for audio drama is, for example, if I use the phrase a really cute puppy or a handsome prince or a very, very stinky sheep, everybody has their own image of what that means. So when people say a handsome prince, I'm going to think of if somebody says a handsome prince, I'm going to think of like a storybook character or a character from a Disney movie. But somebody in Japan might think of the Japanese royal family and whoever their princes are. So everybody brings their own context to it. But I can't really think of a specific example other than that, like where sound always works better. I always feel like it does because people always bring their own context to it and sort of fill in the blanks. And it's sort of like you bring the line drawing and the audience colors it in.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think you're onto something with that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Last question for you then, just around growing our shows. Do you have a favourite growth tactic that doesn't involve video or social media?
My favorite growth tactic is not, it's certainly not a huge one. So I've always made stickers and I keep with the show logo on them, and I keep, a pinch of them in my purse or my pocket or my wallet or whatever. And when I have a conversation with people, because people always ask, oh, so what do you do? Whenever I have a conversation with people that feels like they're open to listening to my podcast or whichever podcast it is I'm working on, I give them a sticker. And I'll also give them a business card with a QR code on it so they can take a picture of it and take that link directly to a Listen Now page. Because I think when you have that conversation with somebody, if you're listening to them and they've said something that makes you feel like they're open to the experience of listening to your podcast, not only are they going to be more likely to follow up on it, but also they're going to feel like, oh, this show is for someone like me. And if they enjoy it, then they'll tell people too. So my mom carries around one business card with a QR code on it for our podcast. And whenever her friends start bragging about their grandchildren or whatever, they say, oh, so what do your kids do? My mom shows it to them and tells them to take a picture of it with their phone. And the whole thing pops up and they're just like, oh, this is wonderful. And people older than me are pretty well versed in the idea of radio drama anyway. So they're used to the idea of, oh, this is something I can listen to on my phone. Oh, this is great. So yeah, that's my growth tactic that is not social media, not audio. It's and I think what works about it is that it involves face-to-face contact and it involves a personal conversation.
It's been great to have you on, Lindsay, and to hear about your experiences working with audio and podcasting. What are you working on at the moment, and is there anything you would like to share with the listener, anywhere you'd like to send them?
The most recent thing I've done is, well, first of all, I'm working on the Fiction Podcast Weekly, which is a newsletter for people I always say it's for people who make audio drama and fiction podcasts and the people who love them, because people can either interpret that as the people who love podcasters or people who love the podcasts. So I'm working on that. It's on Beehive, and if you search for the Fiction Podcast Weekly on Beehive, you will definitely find it. The other thing that I'm working on is, or the most recent project that I did, is a show called it's called Dream Job, and it's created by, well, the official creator is Pack Howell Media, who also created The Madness of Chartrulian. Dream Job it starts off as it sounds like a meditation podcast that will help you manifest the job of your dreams. But then it turns into an experience where you're working for a company where you infiltrate people's dreams and report back to the corporation or to the organization on what you found in those dreams. So yeah, that's the most recent audio drama project that I've got. And also, I'm still working on Life in the Ted Lane with my brother. It's about his Life in the Ted Lane is about his adventures, Broadway and Hollywood news, Muppet news, and what it's like to be autistic.
Great stuff. Well, I'll put links to those in the show notes for sure. And yeah, I really appreciate your time, Lindsay. Thanks for joining us today.
I really appreciate your time, and it is always a pleasure to hear your voice.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Audio Indies. Please make sure you're following or subscribe to the show on your listening app of choice. And if you like what you've heard on this episode, why not share it with someone else who might enjoy it too? Thanks again, and we'll chat next time.